La Russie contre l'Ukraine est inacceptable. This morning, Ukrainians woke up to the brutal, terrifying reality of war. President Putin has launched a horrific, unprovoked attack on their country, a sovereign nation, including missile strikes in their capital, Kiev. He has needlessly put the lives of innocent people at risk, violated Russia's international treaties, and launched the greatest threat to European stability since World War II. Canada is unequivocal in our condemnation of Russia's unprovoked and unjustified attack on the sovereign, democratic state of Ukraine. President Putin's brazen disregard for international law, democracy, and human life are a massive threat to security and peace around the world. I just spoke a few minutes ago with President Zelensky. I told him that we are announcing strong action today and continue to stand with him and with the Ukrainian people. Earlier this morning, I met with G7 partners to coordinate our response. We're also working closely with NATO and our allies. Together, we have made clear that Russian violence, aggression, and violation of international law will not go unpunished. We stand united and steadfast in our support of Ukraine's sovereignty, and we stand in solidarity with the Ukrainian people's right to decide their own future in a free and democratic state. Mardi, après la reconnaissance par le président Poutine des soi-disant États indépendants de Donetsk et Luhansk, le Canada a annoncé une première série de sanctions concertées. Les sanctions du Canada ciblent les responsables des actions illégales de la Russie, ainsi que deux banques russes soutenues par l'État. De plus, on interdit aux Canadiens de faire des achats de la dette souveraine russe. Et il sera interdit de participer à toute transaction financière avec les soi-disant États indépendants de Donetsk et de Luhansk. On a également annoncé le déploiement de jusqu'à 460 membres supplémentaires des forces armées canadiennes pour soutenir l'OTAN sous l'opération Réassurance afin de favoriser la paix et la sécurité en Europe. Today, in light of Russia's reckless and dangerous military strike, we are imposing further severe sanctions. These sanctions will target 58 individuals and entities, including members of the Russian elite and their family members, as well as the Wagner Group and major Russian banks, among others. We will also sanction members of the Russian Security Council, including the Defense Minister, the Finance Minister, and the Justice Minister. In addition, effective immediately, we are ceasing all export permits for Russia and canceling existing permits. These sanctions are wide-reaching. They will impose severe costs on complicit Russian elites, and they will limit President Putin's ability to continue funding this unjustified invasion. Aujourd'hui, suite à la frappe militaire irresponsable et dangereuse de la Russie, on impose d'autres sanctions sévères. Ces sanctions ont une grande portée. Elles vont entraîner de grands coups aux élites russes ayant des liens de complicité et elles vont limiter la capacité du président Poutine à continuer de financer cette invasion injustifiée. Je veux être clair, l'attaque de la Russie contre l'Ukraine est aussi une attaque contre la démocratie, la loi internationale et la liberté. Make no mistake, Russia's attack on Ukraine is also an attack on democracy, on international law, on human rights, and on freedom. Russia's actions stand in direct opposition to the democratic principles that generations of Canadians have fought to protect. Democracies and democratic leaders everywhere must come together to defend these principles and stand firmly against authoritarianism. Russia must immediately cease all hostile actions against Ukraine and withdraw all military and proxy forces from the country. Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity must be respected, and the Ukrainian people, like all people, must be free to determine their own future. I want to be clear. Our quarrel is not with the people of Russia. It is with President Putin and Russian leadership that has enabled and supported this further invasion of Ukraine. La vérité, c'est que la Russie viole la souveraineté de l'Ukraine depuis des années. En 2014, elle a annexé illégalement la Crimée. Depuis, elle n'a jamais cessé de nuire à la démocratie en Ukraine. Et aujourd'hui, le président Poutine a ouvert un nouveau chapitre sombre de cette histoire en lançant une invasion à grande échelle. These are deeply disturbing times for the international community and for people everywhere who care about freedom and democracy. And while the eyes of the world are on leaders, we can never lose sight of the human cost of conflict. Innocent people, including children, are now facing violence and chaos. In these dark hours, Canada's message to the people of Ukraine is this: you are not alone. We are standing with you. For Canadians and permanent residents in Ukraine, your safety and security are now our top priority. We also want to make sure that you can get to safety. We've arranged for safe passage for you and your families at the land borders with Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Moldova. We are urgently issuing travel documents for affected Canadians, permanent residents, and their immediate family members. We're also prioritizing immigration applications for Ukrainians who want to come to Canada. And to ensure we can serve people as quickly as possible, today we are launching a new dedicated phone line for anyone at home or abroad with urgent Ukraine-related immigration questions. Aux Canadiens et aux résidents permanents du Canada qui se trouvent en Ukraine, votre santé et votre sécurité sont notre priorité absolue. On a pris des mesures pour que vous et votre famille puissiez traverser en toute sécurité les frontières avec la Pologne, la Slovaquie, la Hongrie, la Roumanie et la Moldavie. On délivre de toute urgence des documents de voyage aux Canadiens et aux résidents permanents touchés, ainsi qu'aux membres de leur famille immédiate. On traite aussi en priorité les demandes d'immigration provenant d'Ukrainiens qui souhaitent venir au Canada. Et pour être certain de pouvoir servir les gens le plus rapidement possible, on lance aujourd'hui une nouvelle ligne téléphonique spécialement conçue pour les gens qui sont ici ou à l'étranger qui ont d'urgentes questions à poser sur l'immigration en lien avec l'Ukraine. Last night, I spoke with Ukrainian Canadians at the Ukrainian Canadian Congress board meeting. I told them that President Putin has underestimated the strength and unity of democratic allies and partners, and he has underestimated the strength and resolve of Ukrainian people. These are traits of Ukrainian Canadians, too. You have helped build this country. You are proud of your culture and your heritage, and you don't back down. Well, neither will Canada. Our support for Ukraine, for democracy, and for human rights remains unwavering. Merci beaucoup. Je passe maintenant la parole à la vice-première ministre Chrystia Freeland.
To Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland.
Merci, Monsieur le Premier ministre,
Thank you, Prime Minister,
et bon après-midi.
and good afternoon.
Quand nous nous sommes réveillés ce matin,
When we woke up this
le
morning,
monde était différent.
the world was different.
La Russie a lancé une attaque
Russia
brutale
launched a
et non
brutal
provoquée
and unprovoked
contre
attack
l'Ukraine,
against Ukraine,
un pays de plus de 40 millions d'habitants
country with a
qui
population
ne
of over
demande
40 million
que
people,
la paix et la liberté.
which only wants peace and
Today,
freedom.
we woke up to a changed world. Russia has launched a brutal and unprovoked attack on Ukraine, a country of more than 40 million people who have sought nothing but peace and freedom. The horrific human costs of this cruel invasion are the direct and personal responsibility of Vladimir Putin, who has chosen to invade a sovereign democracy and challenge the rules-based international order. History will judge President Putin as harshly as the world condemns him today. Today, he cements his place in the ranks of the reviled European dictators who caused such carnage in the 20th century. The response by Canada and our allies will be swift, and it will bite. This barbaric attack cannot and will not be allowed to succeed. To my own Ukrainian-Canadian community, let me say this. Now is the time for us to be strong as we support our friends and family in Ukraine. Now is the time for us to remember «Ще не вмерла Україна». И моим друзьям в России я хочу сказать прямо и четко. Наша ссора не с российским народом, а с президентом Путиным и с теми, кто его окружают и поддерживают. С теми, кто сделал кровавый выбор атаковать суверенную демократическую страну. Canada understands what is at stake. We know that the people of Ukraine, in fighting for their lives, for their sovereignty, are fighting for us too. They are fighting for democracy, and we stand with them. Thank you very much. Et je passe maintenant la parole à ma collègue, la ministre des Affaires étrangères,
the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mélanie Joly.
Today is a dark day. Last night, Russia launched an unjustified attack on Ukraine. Over the past several months, we have said that Russia was positioning troops and equipment to invade Ukraine. Russia said that it was not, that there was nothing to worry about. Russia lied. We said that Russian military buildups along the border were continuing to grow. Russia said exercises were complete and it was withdrawing troops. This was a complete fabrication. Russia told us their military exercises in Belarus would end on the 20th of February. Today, Russian forces are invading Ukraine from the territory of Belarus. We said that Russia would fabricate a pretext for military intervention in Ukraine, and Russia has tried to do that repeatedly, although in no way convincingly. Russia argued that the Minsk agreements were to be the only roadmap to peace. This week, Vladimir Putin declared the Minsk process dead. For Russia, this was never any question of a diplomatic, for Russia, there was never any question of a diplomatic solution or an honest conversation about security in Europe. That this was always about Russia taking control over Ukraine's sovereignty. Russia is solely responsible for this crisis. They have chosen deception, intimidation, and a manufactured crisis based on lies and false flag operations. Today, the Russian regime is challenging the world order that has kept us safe since the Second World War. Au cours des derniers mois, nous avons dit que la Russie mettait en place des troupes et des équipements pour envahir l'Ukraine. La Russie a dit que ce n'était pas le cas, qu'il n'avait pas lieu de s'inquiéter. La Russie a menti. Nous avons dit que le renforcement militaire
military buildup
le long de la frontière
along
ukrainienne continuait
the
de croître.
Ukrainian border continued
La
to
Russie a
grow.
dit qu'elle allait
Russia
retirer ses
said
troupes.
it was going to withdraw
C'est une
its
pure
troops.
invention.
That was pure
La Russie nous a
fiction.
dit que ses exercices
Russia
militaires au
told us that
Bélarus
its
prendraient fin le 20
military
février.
operations
Aujourd'hui,
in Belarus
ils
would
envahissent
end in
l'Ukraine
late
via
February.
le
Today,
Bélarus.
they're invading Ukraine
La Russie
via
a affirmé que les accords de
Belarus.
Minsk étaient le
They
seul
said
chemin
that
vers la
the
paix.
Minsk
Cette
agreements
semaine,
were the only
Vladimir
roadmap
Poutine a
to
explicitement
peace.
déclaré
But
que le
today,
processus de
President
Minsk
Putin
était
said
mort.
that the Minsk
La
agreement
Russie
was
a donc
dead.
prouvé au monde
So
entier la
Russia
véritable
has
nature du régime de
proven
Vladimir
the
Poutine.
real nature
Ils
of
sont
the
les seuls
Putin
responsables
regime.
de cette crise
They are
qu'ils
solely
ont créée par la
responsible for this
désinformation,
crisis
la
that they
manipulation
created through
et la mauvaise foi.
disinformation, manipulation, and bad faith.
Earlier today, I have been in touch with the Office of President Zelensky, with the Deputy Prime Minister, Finance Minister, and the Foreign Minister of Ukraine. I have been in touch with many of my G7 counterparts and the Secretary General of NATO. We're united. Canada stands with Ukraine and its people. Alongside our allies and partners, we will ensure Russia's actions do not go unpunished. You have heard the Prime Minister. We will impose a strong package of new sanctions targeting all major banks, oligarchs, member of the National Council, including Minister of Defense Shoigu, Minister of Finance Silvanov, and Minister of Justice Trichenko. Canada will also block exports to Russia that require permits. Existing permits will be cancelled and all applications will be denied. No aerospace, technology, and mineral goods will be sent to Russia. Canada has one of the strongest package of sanctions being released today. And together with those from our allies, we're inflicting severe pain on the Russian regime and the Russian economy. We call on Russia to stop its attack immediately and to return to the path of dialogue and diplomacy. This madness has to stop. Comme vous l'avez entendu de la part du Premier ministre, nous imposons des nouvelles sanctions visant toutes les grandes banques russes, les oligarques qui font partie de la garde rapprochée du président Poutine, les membres du Conseil national, notamment le ministre de la Défense, des Finances et de la Justice. Le Canada bloquera également toutes les exportations vers la Russie qui nécessitent des permis. Les permis existants seront annulés et toutes les demandes seront refusées. Aucun bien lié au secteur de l'aérospatial, de la technologie ou encore des minéraux ne pourront être exportés vers la Russie. Le Canada a mis en place l'un des ensembles de sanctions les plus vigoureux et avec ceux de nos alliés, le but est d'affaiblir et d'ébranler le régime russe et son économie. I also spoke again this morning to Canada's ambassador to Ukraine. Our staff are now safely in Poland. As soon as we're able to ensure adequate delivery of services, they will return to Ukraine. Consular services remain available to Canadians in Ukraine. Information on how to reach Global Affairs can be found on our website and on my social media channels. Should there be a surge in demand for consular assistance, we are ready. Our teams in Ottawa, Warsaw, and major European cities are on standby to support. The safety and security of all Canadians is our highest priority. Canadians in Ukraine should shelter in place unless they are able to leave the country safely. I'd like to finish by expressing that I know that the pain we're inflicting on Russia does not compare to that being felt by the Ukrainian people today. You can be assured that Canada and the world is with you. J'aimerais conclure en disant que je comprends que les sanctions que nous imposons à la Russie ne sont pas comparables à la douleur que ressent le peuple ukrainien aujourd'hui. Sois assuré que le Canada et le monde entier est avec vous aujourd'hui. I will now pass the floor to my colleague Anita Anand.
Bonjour tout le monde.
Hello, everyone.
Today is a devastating day for the Ukrainian people, for democratic societies, and for all those who stand for peace and security. Indeed, some in the West have taken peace and security for granted before today. Some may have believed that what is happening right now in Ukraine, in Europe, could not, would not take place. But it is. Putin has chosen to deliberately invade Ukraine, a sovereign, democratic nation that did nothing to warrant this aggression. I am sure many of us could not even imagine what it must have felt like being woken up by explosions. Aujourd'hui est un jour
Today is a
dévastateur pour le peuple
devastating
ukrainien,
day for the
pour les
Ukrainian people,
sociétés
for
démocratiques et pour
democratic
tous qui
societies,
défendent la
and
paix
for all
et
those
la
who stand
sécurité.
for peace and
Poutine
security.
a choisi
Putin
d'envahir
has chosen to
délibérément
deliberately
l'Ukraine,
invade
une
Ukraine,
nation souveraine
a
et
sovereign
démocratique
democratic nation
qui n'a rien fait
who did nothing
pour
to
justifier cette
warrant this
agression.
aggression.
When I visited Ukraine last month, I met with countless hardworking and good people, and I am heartbroken now to know that those same people are fighting for their futures, for their very right to exist as a sovereign people. And to my Ukrainian counterpart, my friend, Minister Resnikov, whom I saw only a few days ago and with whom I am in daily touch, and to all Canadians I say, I am with you, we are with you, Canada is with you. I offer my condolences to the families of the Ukrainians who have been brutally killed, and I wish a speedy recovery to the injured. My thoughts are also with the 1.3 million Ukrainian Canadians watching these unfolding events in horror. Let's be clear. Putin is responsible for these needless deaths, for violating the UN Charter, and for violating the international rules-based order at the same time. And comme Melanie a déjà dit,
As Melanie already
in the
stated,
last few weeks, Putin has tried to convince the world that the path that he has chosen is reasonable and legitimate, mais ce n'est pas le cas, pas du tout.
that is not the case,
Putin's
not at
actions
all.
are not only illegal, they're unconscionable. He has flagrantly disregarded the fundamental rights of Ukrainians to peace, freedom, and self-determination. Since 2014, in fact, Russia has set the stage for this unprovoked invasion, indeed further invasion of Ukraine, for this unwarranted attack on a sovereign people, for this deliberate undermining of the rules-based international order. And there are no arguments that Putin can put forward that could legitimize the choices that he has made. We will not stand for this attack on the rules-based international order. Notre détermination à faire
Our
respecter cet
determination
ordre
to have
international fondé
international
sur
order
les règles
based on
et
rules
à soutenir la
and
sécurité
support
de l'Ukraine, de
the
l'Europe et
security
du
of
monde
Ukraine, of Europe, and the
est
world
inébranlable. Our
will
resolve
never be.
is unwavering. Since the very beginning, when Crimea was invaded in 2014, Canada has been there with Ukraine and all those under threat from Russia's actions. I want to outline 5 points. First, we've been there with strong and coordinated economic sanctions, which will continue to weaken Russia. Second, by putting in place, then extending and expanding Operation Unifier. Under this mission, our Canadian Armed Forces have trained more than 35,000 of their Ukrainian counterparts to help them defend themselves against an eventuality like this one. We have watched Ukraine's soldiers become a more disciplined, more agile, and more effective fighting force. And as soon as conditions allow, we will continue to provide training and capacity building to the Ukrainian military under Operation Unifier. We have also been providing support from a cyber perspective and will continue to do so. Third, by providing significant financial contributions to strengthen Ukraine's institutions and economy, approximately $700 million in total. Fourth, by providing nearly $10 million worth of lethal and non-lethal equipment, which has arrived in full and in time to be effective and useful. Fifth, and finally, by announcing this week the expansion of Operation Reassurance to bolster NATO's eastern flank and to make it clear to Putin that we stand with our allies and our partners in the face of Russian aggression and destabilization efforts. We have also placed 3,400 military personnel across all branches of the service on standby to deploy to the NATO response force should they be required. We have constantly demonstrated, in short, our support for our allies and our partners in the face of authoritarianism and such aggression. I want to personally thank our Canadian Armed Forces for the critical work that they have done to prepare our Ukrainian friends for this fight. In the coming days, months, and years, your country will continue to ask more of you. Given the increasingly dangerous world, just made significantly more dangerous, your service is more important than ever. And I will do everything in my power to ensure that you are resourced to fight and win. And I can confirm that Canadian Armed Forces are ready to assist with the whole of government efforts in the region. Finally, I will remain in close contact with our NATO allies, our Ukrainian partners, and with Minister Resnikov. We cannot allow Putin to redraw maps and to rewrite history to suit his own purposes. We must and we will stand up against these efforts to sow discord, deceit, and violence. Nous ne pouvons pas permettre à Poutine de redessiner les cartes et de décrire l'histoire pour servir ses propres objectifs. En cette période critique pour l'Ukraine, pour l'Europe et pour le monde, le Canada et ses alliés de l'OTAN sont plus unis, plus résolus et plus forts que jamais. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Anand. We will be taking 20 minutes of questions, starting with the room. One question, one follow-up, then we'll go to the phone. On va prendre 20 minutes de questions, en commençant avec les journalistes dans la salle. Et on va aller au téléphone. Une question, une sous-question, en commençant avec the Canadian Press.
Prime Minister Laura Osman with the Canadian Press. Given everything you and your ministers have just said, is the West at war and is Canada prepared to fight in it?
We condemn unequivocally this attack on Ukraine, this invasion of Ukraine, but also the violation of the UN Charter, the principles, the rule of law internationally, and we will respond forcefully to make sure that Russia fails, that Russia does not benefit from having invaded Ukraine. We've demonstrated, not just with Canada's response and sanctions, but with the unity that we've seen amongst G7, amongst NATO leaders, amongst EU leaders, and indeed amongst leaders from around the world, that what Russia is doing is terrible and wrong and will be met firmly and forcefully with a response that will punish Russia and make sure they understand that this was a grave misunderstanding of the rules-based order and a grave miscalculation by Vladimir Putin.
And perhaps for Minister Freeland, I'd just love to ask you, is this the end of the post-World War II order as we know it? And certainly the Ukrainian ambassador believes so. And what does that mean for Canada moving forward?
Thank you for the question. It's a really important one. And the reason that we are so determined today, the reason you heard such determination from the Prime Minister and my ministerial colleagues today, is we cannot allow this to be the end of the post-World War II rules-based order. It could be. This is an extremely serious challenge to that order. And if Russia succeeds, then that order will be breached. And we can't let that happen. We can't let that happen because that would be devastating for the world. And it would be really bad for Canada. Canada was one of the countries that built the rules-based international order after the Second World War. Canadians fought and died to build that order. And they did that because they cared about the world, but they also did it because they understood that as a middle power, as a democracy, we really need those rules to be firmly in place. So yes, it is a moment of grave danger. And that's why when all of us said today that the people of Ukraine are fighting for their own democracy and their own sovereignty, but they're fighting for all of us. And that's why we need to support them.
Next question.
Yasmine Mehdi avec Radio-Canada. Il y a 2 jours, vous
Radio-Canada.
annonciez
2 days ago,
des sanctions, une première
you
vague de
announced
sanctions. Ça n'a
first
pas
wave of
arrêté
sanctions. That did
Vladimir
not stop
Poutine. Est-ce
Vladimir
qu'on
Putin.
pense vraiment que
Do we
plus
really
de
think
sanctions
that
vont
more
changer quelque
sanctions
chose ou
will
est-ce qu'on est
change
face
anything,
à
or
un
we
acteur
face
irrationnel
an
devant
irrational
lequel les
actor
sanctions ne
for
changeront
which
absolument
sanctions
rien?
will change
On a
absolutely
vu à
nothing?
quel point
We saw to
c'est
what extent
important
it's
pour Poutine
important for
de
Putin
justifier
to
en utilisant
justify
des
himself
mensonges
by
et de la
using
propagande,
lies and
ses
propaganda
actions
for his actions
auprès de sa propre population russe.
when it comes to
Depuis
communicating with the
plusieurs
Russian
semaines, même
population.
plusieurs années,
For
il
the past
contrôle les
few weeks or
médias,
even the past few years, he's been
il utilise
controlling the
énormément
media.
d'outils de propagande
He uses a lot of
pour convaincre
propaganda
les Russes
tools to convince
d'une
Russians
justification
of some justification, a false one,
pour leurs actions, pour
for his actions,
la menace,
for the
la
threat,
soi-disant
the
menace que
so-called threat
présentait l'Ukraine.
represented by Ukraine.
La Russie a besoin, même si
Russia,
c'est une autocratie et non une démocratie,
even if it's an autocracy and
Poutine
not
a
a
besoin
democracy, Putin needs
d'expliquer que
to
c'est dans
explain
l'intérêt
that it's in the
de sa
interest
population
of his
d'agir
population to
de
take
façon
action
injustifiée,
in an
injustifiable contre l'Ukraine.
unjustified and
Et les
unjustifiable way
sanctions,
against
et
Ukraine.
pas juste les sanctions, mais
And the sanctions, not
l'unité
just the sanctions, but
qu'on
the
est en train de
unity
démontrer
that we're demonstrating right now
par rapport à ses actions au niveau du G7, au niveau
when
de
faced
l'OTAN, au
with his
niveau de
actions,
l'Europe, au
if
niveau
it's
de
the
pays dans le
G7,
monde qui
NATO,
condamnent
Europe, or all the countries of the world
cette
that are
action
condemning
qui
this
s'est
action,
passée en Ukraine, mais
which
qui aurait
happened
pu
in
se passer
Ukraine, but
n'importe
could
où
have
ailleurs,
happened anywhere else,
va rendre ça extrêmement
will make it
coûteux
extremely
pour
expensive
l'économie russe,
for the
pour
Russian
l'État et les
economy, for the
dirigeants
state, for
russes,
its leaders,
mais aussi pour tous
but
ceux qui les
also
appuient.
for all those who support them.
On sait que ça va faire vraiment
We
mal
know
à
that
des
this
gens qui
will
vont
really
demander de
hurt
meilleures
people
réponses et de
who
meilleures
are going to
explications
ask for
à
better
Poutine qui
explanations,
ne peut
better
pas en
answers
offrir
from
parce que
Putin, who
c'est
cannot
totalement
offer any
injustifié,
because this is
injustifiable, ce
completely
qu'il a fait en
unjustified
envahissant
and
un pays souverain.
unjustifiable. He invaded a sovereign country.
Ça répond pas tout à
I
fait à la
understand,
question
but
de
that doesn't
est-ce que
really
ça va
answer
changer
the
quelque chose?
question.
Vous le traitez de
Will this
dictateur, vous
change
disiez qu'il est de
anything? You said he's a
mauvaise foi,
dictator,
que c'est un
he's acting in
menteur.
bad faith,
Est-ce
he's
que
a
des
liar.
sanctions, ça change quelque chose? Et
Will
aussi, est-ce qu'il y a
sanctions
un
change
contexte où on
anything?
irait
Is
plus
there a
loin en envoyant,
context in
par
which
exemple,
we might go
l'armée
further
canadienne
by
peut-être
sending the
même se
Canadian
battre
Army
aux
to
côtés des
fight
Ukrainiens?
next to the
On sait très bien
Ukrainians? We know
que
full well
ça va avoir un impact
that this
sur
will
la
have an
Russie.
impact on
Ces
Russia.
sanctions, pas juste par
These
le Canada,
sanctions, not just by
mais
Canada,
par les pays
but
européens,
by
les
European
États-Unis,
countries, the United
la
States,
Grande-Bretagne et
Great
d'autres pays
Britain,
alliés
and
à
other
travers le monde
allies worldwide
qui se rassemblent pour dire
who
très
are coming
clairement,
together to state
on le
very
prend pas.
clearly, we're not accepting
on
this.
n'accepte pas
We do not accept
que Vladimir
that
Poutine
Vladimir Putin
choisisse de faire fi,
is
de
choosing
bafouer
to
complètement
completely
les règles
disregard
qui nous ont gardés
the rules
sains et
that
saufs et
kept us
stables en tant
safe
que
and
monde
stable
depuis plus de 75 ans.
worldwide for
C'est pas
75
juste une
years.
attaque contre
It's not
l'intégrité
just an
territoriale
attack
de
against the
l'Ukraine,
territorial
c'est une
integrity
attaque
of Ukraine.
contre les
It's an
principes
attack
démocratiques
against democratic principles
que nous avions bien établis,
that we had
les règles
established
du
firmly,
jeu aux Nations Unies,
the UN
qui nous mettent
rules,
tous en danger. Et c'est pour ça
and
que
this
le monde
endangers
entier
us all. That's
est en
why the
train de
entire
réagir
world is
fermement
reacting
pour
firmly
s'assurer
to make
que
sure
Poutine
that
échoue
Putin fails
dans son essai
in his
de
attempt
tirer quelque avantage
to
pour sa
draw some
propre gloire
advantage for
personnelle
his
pour
own
la
personal
Russie.
glory or for Russia.
Hi, Prime
Next
Minister
question.
John Barry, CBC. Can you provide more detail in terms of the sanctions you're bringing in today? The ones that, targeted at individuals, are you freezing assets? Are you seizing assets? And on the export permits, what's that worth? And if I could put a third part in, the Premier of Alberta is talking about a global ban on Russian oil and gas imports. What would you think about that?
These are all conversations that we've been having throughout the past weeks amongst our allies. We know that Russia is a significant source of natural gas and oil for European partners. And one of the things that we've been doing over the past number of weeks is ensuring that there are alternatives to Russia, not just to make sure that our friends and allies in Europe continue to be able to function their economies and support their people, but to make sure that Putin no longer draws sustenance for his economy from selling those products around the world. In regards to sanctions, any individual country can only have so much of an impact, particularly Canada, that doesn't have huge trade with Russia, to be honest. Since Crimea in 2014, we have significantly decreased our interactions with Russia. But the cumulative impact of the unity in the West in standing strong on these sanctions is going to be significant. And to further speak about these sanctions, I'll turn to Minister Joly.
Thank you. So in response to your question regarding permits, we're canceling all already issued permits and pending permits. Hundreds of permits are now being canceled, and it is worth more than $700 million. It includes companies in the aerospace sector. It includes companies that are in the technology, IT sector. It includes also technologies that are in the minerals sector. These companies need to have permits to send their goods to Russia. And so that's why this is how we as a government can really have a strong impact. If I may go back to your question that you asked about the impact of the international rule-based order, I think that Canada, the world needed Canada after the Second World War, and the Deputy Prime Minister explained it very well. I think that now the world needs even more Canada, because it is important that we reach out, yes, to the G7, yes, to countries within the NATO alliance, but also countries that are preoccupied with their own sovereignty and territorial integrity across South America, across Africa, across the Gulf, and across Asia. And that's what we'll be doing in the coming days. Thank you.
Next question.
Prime Minister, I asked you a version of this earlier this week about the effectiveness of sanctions. And it seems to me that sanctions are designed to get a response from a rational actor. And I'm wondering if you think Vladimir Putin at this time is a rational actor.
I think Vladimir Putin has come to believe that he can lie with impunity, that he can violate international law with impunity, and that he can do whatever he wants in the interests of the Russian state. And what we are demonstrating with this strong, united response is that is simply not true. That democracies can and will push back against autocracies. That we will demonstrate that we can follow up to defend the values and the principles that we, and indeed people around the world, hold dear. The freedom, respect for the rule of law, of human rights. And sanctions work. We've seen it, our ambassador to the United Nations brought up the example of sanctions against apartheid South Africa in the 80s that ended up bringing about an end to that regime and that approach. Yes, we will continue to demonstrate that those who violate the rules-based international order don't get to benefit from the trade, the opportunities, the economic growth that comes with a stable, clear, international, rules-based order.
Prochaine question.
Of course, Christian.
I'd just like to add one thing about the impact of these targeted sanctions and about Russia. I think it is so important as we see the Kremlin order this truly barbaric act to be very clear that our fight, our opposition, our fierce criticism is not of the Russian people. And in fact, Russia has such an amazing, rich intellectual tradition, such an amazing intelligentsia. And there have already been Russian intellectuals, Russian journalists, Russian writers speaking out and saying how terrible, how vile this action is. That takes real, real courage. And we have to hear those voices too. One of my Russian friends, a Russian economist who actually worked in the government under Yeltsin, but also under Putin, sent me an email this morning saying now he knows how it felt to be a good German in 1939. And there are people in Russia who feel that way. And it's important for us to see them too. And when it comes to the sanctions, Melanie and her colleagues have done a very, very good job at targeting the people who have been Putin's fellow travelers, people who have been able to become extremely rich, enjoy all of the pleasures of the West, of Western democracies, while aiding and abetting Vladimir Putin. And what these united sanctions from the West are saying to those people, to the Russian oligarchs, is you're not going to be able to keep on doing that. You are not going to be able to be a high roller, enjoying all of the fantastic things which Western democracy has created, and continue to support this evil, barbaric policy. And I believe that that will have a real impact.
Bonjour, M. Trudeau, Olivier Ferrand-Boissé de TVA.
TVA.
Le président Poutine a indiqué que
President
quiconque
Putin
tenterait d'interférer à l'opération s'exposera à une réponse de Russie immédiate et conduira à des conséquences que vous n'avez encore jamais connues. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire selon vous? Est-ce que vous craignez cette menace-là? Est-ce que ça pourrait aussi expliquer que ça fait en sorte que vous évitiez de contribuer à une réponse militaire plus musclée?
On a contribué à la réponse militaire avec des armements qu'on a envoyés qui sont présentement dans les mains de l'armée ukrainienne pour se défendre contre cette invasion russe. Et par rapport aux menaces de la Russie et de Vladimir Poutine, nous restons solidaires. Les leaders du G7, les leaders de l'Europe, les pays de l'OTAN, et nous allons être sans équivoque dans notre solidarité, pas seulement avec l'Ukraine, mais avec les principes de règles de droit qui nous protègent tous à l'international. C'est une violation profonde des règles qui nous ont gardés en paix depuis plus de 75 ans. Et nous nous devons de se tenir fermement debout
to stand up firmly to demonstrate that Vladimir Putin will not profit from this invasion of a sovereign country. Next question.
Prime Minister, Chris Nachkate, CTV National News. Would you be willing to fast-track Ukrainians to Canada? And how soon and how many Ukrainians? And will you try to avoid a similar incident with what we saw in Afghanistan with people trying to flee to Canada there and many were unable to get here?
We have worked over the past many weeks to prepare exactly for such eventualities. And as I mentioned in my prepared remarks, we are facilitating the crossing of Canadians and permanent residents into neighboring countries. We are emitting rapid travel documentation for those who need it. We're providing support for Canadians in Ukraine. We are there to accelerate visa applications and extensions for Ukrainians in Canada right now. We are going to use all those tools to make sure that Canada continues to be a good friend to the Ukrainian people, even as they suffer through this horrific and unjustified attack.
Next question.
Hi, Prime Minister. Mercedes Stevenson, Global News. I'm wondering why you haven't chosen to sanction Vladimir Putin directly. Muammar Gaddafi did suffer that fate, and you're talking about making Mr. Putin feel the consequences of his actions, but you haven't chosen to target him directly. Why is that? And is it because you're concerned about the threats he has made on anyone who will do that and the possible implications for Canadian security and the Canadian economy?
The key thing on sanctions has been to come forward in a coordinated way with all our allies, and that is the unity that is most damaging to the Kremlin and to Vladimir Putin, that we are all unequivocal and united on this. But for further comments on sanctions, I'll turn to Minister Joly.
Thank you, Mr. Rees. Today is a first important package of sanctions. There will be other sanctions coming. And that's important for the Canadian public to understand, because we want to make sure to put maximum pressure on Vladimir Putin's regime and also on the Russian economy. To do that, we need to do the work with our allies. We will continue to work with them, and we will really make sure that we're coordinated in locksteps. It is important for us to act as one. We don't want to create any form of loopholes. We want to make sure that our unity continues to be our strength. Thank you. Donc aujourd'hui, c'est un premier ensemble de sanctions très important, un des ensembles de sanctions les plus importants de tous nos alliés.
Of any of our allies, but it's only a start. There'll be other sanctions. Every time we announce other sanctions, we will do that in a coordinated way with our allies. The objective is to be united. Why? Because we must make sure
en fait de façon pour les personnes qui font partie de la garde rapprochée de Poutine, qui font partie de cette influence qu'exerce le régime russe sur sa population, mais en fait que ces personnes-là ne puissent pas avoir droit d'échappatoire. Et donc, dans les circonstances, on va travailler avec nos alliés G7, avec nos alliés aussi au sein de l'Alliance de l'OTAN et d'autres alliés.
Any other allies. Thank you.
Merci. On va maintenant passer au téléphone. Opérateur, c'est à vous.
Thank you. Merci. The first question will be from Justin Ling, freelance. Please go ahead. The line is open.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. In the last 12 hours, we've seen a considerable amount of success from the Ukrainians in shooting down Russian aircraft. They've done that thanks largely to surface-to-air missiles given to them by their Baltic allies. They've been requesting this sort of equipment from the West, from Canada specifically. Are we considering purchasing any kind of Stinger or Manpad missiles that could be given to the Ukrainian army?
Thank you, Justin. As you know, we've successfully delivered 2 shipments of lethal aid on top of military equipment that we sent a number of weeks ago. We continue to look at more and further ways to support the Ukrainian military in their brave stand against the Russian invaders. We continue to exchange with allies and coordinate to make sure that we're getting the Ukrainian military the tools that they need. But on further elements on that, I'm happy to turn to Minister Anand.
When I was in Ukraine, in Kyiv, a few weeks ago, I sat down with Minister Resnikov, and we had at least an hour and a half conversation about this very topic. We spoke in detail about the types of aid that Ukraine needed and the types of aid that Canada had in inventory to provide. And what we have done is to provide almost $10 million in lethal and non-lethal aid at the current time. Your question, of course, is what, in addition, can we do as a country? And I want to assure you and Canadians that our government is examining all options to consider further aid to Ukraine. It would be imprudent to describe those options at the current time, but as soon as we have more to tell, we will do so. Thank you.
Following up.
Yeah, clearly we're continuing to follow these ramping up of sanctions. I'm wondering if you can preview what other sort of diplomatic or economic or even cultural pressures Canada can exert. Obviously, there's conversations about recalling ambassadors. Some European countries have moved to take Russian propaganda outlet RT off the air. And there are conversations about how to identify and potentially freeze and seize the assets of oligarchs who support Mr. Putin's regime. Can you give some detail about what that could look like in the coming days and weeks in Canada?
Well, these actually are all elements that we discussed this morning amongst G7 leaders and indeed have been the topic of conversation between our ministers and their counterparts and allies around the world for many, many days now. We are announcing today a extremely strong, unprecedented series of sanctions because of Russia's illegal invasion into Ukraine. But as was pointed out, we will continue to look for more and further ways to work in a coordinated, concerted fashion, and not just European countries and NATO members like Canada and the United States, but other partners around the world who are also expressing very real concern that if Vladimir Putin succeeds and benefits from this illegal and unjustifiable invasion of a neighboring country, then all are at risk. And we have undone the incredibly hard work of generations to establish a set of rules in our international order that have benefited us all and allowed for unprecedented peace and stability around the world, despite the very many challenges we face.
Thank you. Operator, we'll take one last question on the phone.
Thank you. Merci. Et la prochaine question va être de Mélanie Marquis, La Presse. À vous la parole.
Mélanie Marquis, La Presse.
Bonjour, ma question est pour M. Trudeau.
Thank you. My
la
question is
première,
for
en
Mr.
fait,
Trudeau.
je reviens sur justement la toute
I'd like to
première
get
question
back
qui a
to
été
the very
posée.
first question
Est-ce
that
que
was
le Canada
asked.
est en guerre?
Is Canada
Votre
at
ministre,
war?
Mme Anand, a dit que
Your
les
minister,
troupes
Ms.
étaient prêtes,
Anand,
qu'il y avait
said the
l'appui du
troops were
gouvernement.
ready, that they had the support of the
Qu'est-ce qui donnerait
government.
le signal que
What
là,
would
il faut
give the
envoyer
signal
des
that
troupes
we have
sur le
to
terrain?
send troops
On n'a pas à
on
le
the
faire en
ground?
Ukraine parce que l'Ukraine n'est pas membre de l'OTAN, mais ça
Ukraine is
passerait
not
par
a
quoi?
NATO member,
Ou
but
une résolution de l'ONU?
would it
Est-ce
take
que
a
le
UN
Canada
resolution?
appuierait une
Would
intervention
Canada
militaire? Je
support
m'excuse pour
military
donner une question.
intervention?
Non, c'est des très bonnes
No,
questions,
those are very
Mélanie,
good
parce que
questions,
tout le
Mélanie,
monde est en
because
train de se
everyone
demander ça.
is
Mais
wondering
la
that.
réalité,
The reality
c'est que
is
la meilleure façon
that the
pour
best
nous
way for us
de démontrer
to demonstrate
à Vladimir Poutine qu'il a
to
fait
Vladimir
une
Putin
grave
that
erreur
he's made
en
a
violant les
grave error
principes
by
de
violating
droit qui nous
rules-based order
régissent comme monde depuis
that
bien
have
des
been
décennies,
governing the world for decades,
c'est en s'assurant qu'il
is
ne
by ensuring
profite pas,
that he
qu'il ne
cannot
bénéficie
profit,
pas
that he can't
de
benefit
cette erreur
from
monumentale
this
qu'il a faite
monumental error that he's
en
committed
envahissant
by
un pays
invading
souverain.
a sovereign country.
Alors, oui, on est là
So,
pour
yes,
appuyer
we are there
avec des armements et
to
de
support
l'aide
them with
militaire
weapons
et
and military
économique
aid and economic
l'Ukraine.
aid.
On est aussi
We
là
also
pour
there
renforcer
to
nos
support
partenaires de l'OTAN
and reinforce our NATO partners to demonstrate that we are an alliance that will respond and will defend itself if there is an attack against one of our members. But at the same time, we are demonstrating that democracies
la règle de droit
that
international ne vont pas
the international
hésiter
rule of law will not hesitate to respond in a firm way,
réelle,
in a very real way, to anyone like Putin
violerait les
who
principes qui nous
violates
gardent en
the
sécurité depuis
principles that have
des décennies.
kept us safe for decades. Follow up?
Oui, le suivi pour Madame
My
Joly, vous
follow-up
avez
would be for
rencontré
Ms. Joly.
l'ambassadeur
You
russe
met
un
with
peu plus
the
tôt
Russian
aujourd'hui.
ambassador earlier
Pouvez-vous d'abord
today.
juste nous faire un petit compte
Could
rendu de
you
la
give
rencontre,
us
mais aussi nous dire si
overview
vous
of
en
that
êtes
meeting
rendu
and tell us
à envisager son expulsion à
whether
l'ambassadeur
you're
ou
considering
encore
his
le rappel
expulsion
de
as
l'ambassadrice du
ambassador or
Canada qui est
calling
en
back
poste à Moscou.
the
Merci,
ambassador to
Mélanie.
Russia
J'ai eu
in
l'occasion de
Moscow.
parler
Yes, I had
à
an
notre ambassadrice à
opportunity
Moscou un
to
peu plus tôt
speak to our
aujourd'hui
ambassador in Moscow earlier
pour faire le
today
point sur la
and
question, avoir de l'information sur
get information
l'état des lieux à Moscou et en
state of
Russie au moment où
affairs
on se
in
parle.
Moscow and Russia
C'est
right
important,
now.
bien entendu, qu'on ait
Of course, it's
accès à cette
important to have
information-là.
access to that
Et nous
information.
sommes en contact avec elle.
And we're
Je
in
suis également en
contact with
contact
her,
avec mes
but
collègues
I'm also
ministres des
in
Affaires
contact
étrangères du
with
G7
my
pour qu'on
colleagues, the
soit coordonnés
ministers
dans notre réponse
in the
au niveau
G7 so
diplomatique.
that we can
Premier
have
point.
a
Deuxième point, j'ai eu l'occasion
coordinated
de
response from a
rencontrer
diplomatic
l'ambassadeur
standpoint, and I
russe.
met the Russian
Je lui ai
ambassador.
expliqué
I explained to
fermement,
him
droit dans
very
les yeux,
firmly,
exactement
looking him
quelle
at
était la
him eye to
position
eye,
du
what
gouvernement du Canada par
the
rapport
government of Canada's position
à
was
l'invasion de
about
l'Ukraine
the
par la
invasion of
Russie.
Ukraine
Et
by
donc,
Russia.
le message a
So
été
the message
bien compris.
was
Et puis,
understood
nous allons continuer de
very well,
monitorer la
and we'll
situation.
continue to
Mais
monitor the
vous
situation.
devez comprendre, bien
You have to
entendu, que le
understand,
lien
of
de
course,
confiance entre le Canada et la Russie est rompu au moment où on se
trust
parle.
between Canada and
Je
Russia
pense
has
que ma
been
collègue
broken now.
Anita Annan avait
I
quelque
think
chose
my
à
colleague Ms. Annan
à
had
ajouter à
something to
ta
add
question, Mélanie. Alors, je lui
to
cède la
your
parole.
question. I'll give her the floor.
Bonjour Mélanie, au
Hello,
sujet
Mélanie.
de nos missions,
With regard to
je
our
voudrais être
missions, I
claire.
want to be clear.
Ce sont des missions pour la
These
formation, ça c'est
are
pour
training
unifier,
missions.
et pour réassurance, ça c'est
unify,
pour la
That's for
dissuasion.
unifier, and
Ce n'est
reassurance
pas
is a
des
deterrent
missions
mission.
pour
These are
le
not
combat. Et
combat
comme le
missions.
secrétaire général de l'OTAN a
And
dit
as the
ce
NATO
matin,
Secretary General
ça
said
c'est
this
le cas.
morning,
Nous n'avons pas les missions pour le combat
we don't
et
have a
ça
combat mission
doit
right
être
now.
clair
That has to be
pour
clear
notre pays et
for our
pour
country
nos forces armées
and for
canadiennes
our
aussi.
Canadian Armed Forces
Merci.
as well. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. C'est ce qui
Thank
met fin
you
à la
very
conférence de
much.
presse d'aujourd'hui. This is
That
Wednesday's
puts an
press
end.
conference. Thank you all.